Hello and welcome back to Captain's Quadrant, section 31 and a half, as we have questions. And boy, do we have the perfect question to ask all the questions. None other than Aaron J. Waltke himself, head writer of Star Trek Prodigy, a very beloved and admired show that we all miss dearly. Aaron, welcome, and how are you?
I'm good. I feel like I cut out just as we started that intro, but hopefully you can hear me okay.
You're good. You're good. Don't worry.
uh, okay, I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks for coming on. We appreciate you. It means a lot. I'm going to kick us off with a very important question. How did this all come to pass? What was the earliest spark that became Star Trek Prodigy? How did you shape and tone it as a head writer? Because even though it's a kid show, I loved it. It worked so well for me as an old man.
Yeah, well, that as designed and intended.
Mm,
So Star Trek Prodigy was the brainchild of the Hageman brothers. They were approached by Secret Hideout to develop a YA, entry to animated entry to Star Trek, because they had worked on a number of sort of action adventure animated shows like Ninjago and Troll Hunters,
mm.
and I actually worked on a series called. Whoa, what was that?
Don't worry.
Some Italian
Okay.
guy just came out of a pipe. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
I was gonna say, it's yeah, and so I worked with the Hageman brothers on a series called Troll Hunters, that was created by Guillermo del Toro,
Oh,
that was on Netflix, and very high end animated CGI um, action adventure series. There's the 52 episodes and had two spin-offs, which I eventually show ran on one of those. And the Hagemans and I always got along well. And at one point, I was co-show running on a series called Wizards for DreamWorks Animation and at Netflix. And the Hageman brothers are writing the final movie that was sort of the capstone to that series, and their office was next door. And I remember one day they kind of came in and said, "Hey, you like Star Trek, right?" I was like, "Yes, I do." And as I've said elsewhere, Star Trek has always been part of my DNA for as long as I can remember as a sentient human being.
there you
There's
go.
not really a time I can remember not enjoying or watching Star Trek. Like one of my earliest memories was watching uh, what I later realized was the premiere of Star Trek: The Next Generation way back in September of 1987. I was sitting on the couch with my dad, and I remember there like the big fanfare was playing, and there was a saucer separation happening,
Yeah. That
and
was a
I was
big
and
deal.
I
Like
was like,
Counter 4 point. Yeah.
yeah, and I was like, I don't know what's happening as a 3 year old, but this is amazing,
Yeah.
and I was hooked ever since. And my dad was a huge Star Trek fan, and it was sort of a way that we kind of bonded. We went to all the movies together, and he was a TOS fan and got into TNG as so many others did. And and then Deep Space Nine came along and Voyager, and I just never stopped enjoying it. And so when they asked if I like Star Trek, I said, "Yeah, I like Star Trek."
Yeah, play it off. Nah, yeah, yeah, it's okay. It's pretty cool. Yeah, yeah.
And so they had pitched this idea to Secret Hideout that was, some kids find a starship and it winds up being a Federation ship that kind of becomes their salvation to the stars. And they said, "What do you think? Does that pass the smell test?" And I was like, "I think that's a really interesting idea
I think it was
because we've
brilliant.
always seen in Star Trek the story of the Federation venturing out into the great unknown to seek out new life and new civilizations, but we haven't really seen it in reverse. The closest we got was Deep Space Nine, but even that was through the lens of this sort of like diplomatic kind of
Right. Station.
thoroughfare, even though so many of the characters were not members of the Federation. But we've never seen it starting from a place of an alien civilization discovering what the Federation was from like the ground up. And so, I gave my seal of approval and gave a few suggestions, like what if as they're learning about the Federation, there was a holographic character who you wouldn't have to worry about how long the ship was there or where it came from, but it could still embody everything that makes Starfleet great. And Secret Hideout loved the idea, they used to joke that I was employee number one because I was the first one
Oh,
that they came to and said, all right, we're making the show, come on board.
that's awesome.
So that first season I was a writer and co-producer, moonlighting on the show while I was wrapping up show running on Wizards. And then second season came around, and I was lucky enough that they asked me to come be co-executive producer and head writer. And so that was my journey into Star Trek Prodigy.
Awesome. Awesome. Really quick before Jason asks his question, there's an amazing sword behind you. Is that
Yes,
from Lord of the Rings or
it is indeed. That is
Aragon's sword?
Aragorn's sword.
Yeah.
Isildur.
Isildur's heir.
Yes, Isildur's heir, and I love Lord of the Rings and fantasy as well, and I had that hanging on my wall when I was working on Wizards, which was a medieval fantasy series.
Yeah.
And I have many trophies on my back wall over there. I don't know if you can see all of them, but you can see I have a Star Trek Prodigy poster right there.
Awesome. That's amazing. So sorry, I just saw that. I was like, wait a minute. I love Lord of the Rings. So go ahead, Jay. Sorry about that.
Well, Prodigy. Oh no, it's fine. It's fine. Let's just make it all about you, Joe. It's fine. So Star Trek Prodigy. I loved this show for many different reasons. For one, my kids always thought I was kind of a nerd because I love Star Trek, and then they'd come along and they'd watch this show like, ooh, what is this? And so we'd sit and watch the show together, and then I'd be like, ha, it was Star Trek all along. Ha, and I'd throw down a smoke grenade and run away. I loved the way that Prodigy balanced, to me, almost perfectly, accessibility for younger viewers while still valuing the place that longtime fans have with the show. I want to know, what was your method to writing for both of these audiences and not compromising either one?
Yeah, I mean, it was a bit of a tricky balancing act, I will say that. It was, because when we started, no one had really ever tried to do something like this before. The closest we got was with the animated series back in the 70s, but even that was sort of just written like a Star Trek show that just happened to be animated. So our starting point really was, we didn't necessarily want to talk down to audiences, but we wanted to make it accessible to new audiences. So the first few weeks, we just sat down and said, what are all the cool things about Star Trek? If you had to explain every element about it that you like about it, that's both iconic or that you think is important to understanding Star Trek, what would those things be if you were talking to somebody who knew nothing about the franchise? And of course, they immediately were like, "Oh, we got to explain what transporters are and phasers and replicators and all that sort of thing." But then also the breaking down the ideals and the fundamentals of what the Federation represents, of this sort of like idealistic future that's beyond want and scarcity, and which naturally led us into conversations like, if we had a bunch of young people, alien or not, who perhaps grew up outside of that system, how would they view it? Maybe they would initially distrust it because it felt too good to be true, but gradually come to realize, as their sort of hierarchy of needs was met, that they themselves could be as selfless and embody the Federation, even if they weren't officially Starfleet yet. And that was our approach, and it seemed to work pretty well.
Yeah, we were hooked, so did a good job. Prodigy pulls from decades of Trek history. How did you decide of which parts of the canon to like honor or like kind of change just a little bit to make it slightly different?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it came down to, there were enough hardcore Star Trek fans in the room that there was never a question of like, oh, where are we going to find this canon? We had plenty of canon floating around our heads. It was more a question of like, how do we slip this in where it feels organic to the story that we're telling with these young people? Yeah. And once we had settled on a hologram that was based on Captain Janeway, which we thought made total sense as someone who would, as we know from Deep Space Nine and elsewhere, that many of these emergency holograms are based on real people,
right?
Just like Zimmerman was the model of the Doctor.
The Doctor, yeah.
And I think there's even an episode in Deep Space Nine where they try to scan Bashir to
Yeah,
maybe
they just,
create
I think they referenced it in Academy today.
They did,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we were like, well, that's an opportunity to bring in like a new version, a familiar but different version of a character that you know. And we realized who better than Janeway to kind of like emerge, someone who is thrust into the great unknown of the Delta Quadrant, forced to take this rebel crew of Maquis and Starfleet and outsiders like Neelix and Kess, and just kind of try to train them up and into a crew that functions well together on day one in less than ideal situations. That felt like, of course, she would be the model for an emergency training hologram. And once we settled on that, then we realized we had sort of like this great entry point, because I think for a lot of Star Trek fans for a long time, at least until this third wave of Star Trek came along, we got up to Voyager. And then, there were some of the movies went a little bit further into the Star Trek future, but for the most part, those were pretty self-contained and didn't really show what was going on in the rest of the Star Trek universe.
Yeah.
And so a lot of fans from the 90s and 2000s, like myself, that brain cursor was just kind of like stuck of like, well, what happened after Voyager? Where's the 2380s and beyond?
Yeah.
And so that felt like a natural entry point to start with, and then build off of the legacy of what Voyager had and start working backwards to eventually be like an entry point to all of Star Trek. So we felt like, because the 2380s, for the most part, were kind of unexplored territory, and even as Picard and Lower Decks kind of staked out their claims, that still was a 20-year gap where very little was defined outside of, the Kelvinverse movies have that cold open about the Romulan evacuation, and then a couple of flashbacks relating to that from Picard. But otherwise, it's just sort of like wide open terrain to kind of fill in the immediate aftermath of where a lot of Star Trek fans sort of canon left off for 20 years.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to kind of find a way to bridge the gap between the old and the new, because obviously Picard was staking out its own kind of aesthetics, and then beyond that, Discovery and all those shows as well. But we wanted it to be sort of like this kind of stepping stone in between those that also felt like it was opening space for new stories to be told, and so adding to canon was never a problem, but the fun of it was finding ways to tie it into existing canon and make it feel like you're answering questions that might have been bothering you ever since Enterprise went off the air in 2014 or whatever.
Yeah. Oh man.
So I'm going to kind of go off script here for a second, Joe. So you were
Okay.
talking about yeah, no, it was like, no way. So you were talking earlier about how Prodigy kind of tied into canon in many ways. I noticed with the new series Star Trek Starfleet Academy, they are actually pulling a lot from Star Trek Prodigy. Dahl and Zero and Gwendala have all gotten shout outs, and at one point we see this gorgeous CGI Brickar walking across campus, and I was just like, oh my gosh, I love this. I was just wondering, did the producers of that show reach out to you and say, or anybody on your staff and say, hey, this is what we're wanting to do, or did you have any input on that at all?
Yeah, so they were writing the first season as we were writing the second season, or we were midway through producing, I should say, the second season. So we had, I think, about like 10 episodes of the second season finished, and various stages for the rest of it, and animatics and scripts and that sort of thing. So when it came time to look at a model of what Starfleet Academy could or should be, what our show wound up, especially second season, wound up being a major inspiration for them. And Noga and Alex are both huge fans of Prodigy and watched it beginning to end. And Noga even reached out once we had turned in the last script, and she was like, "This is a really great series, guys." And
really
they were more than delighted to find a way to acknowledge that sort of legacy that our show had. And I was very grateful for that, because I think even though obviously our show is and always has been canon because it's on the air.
Yeah.
There's always a few people that have weird definitions of what counts or what they should watch based on whether it's live action or not. But thankfully they those at Starfleet Academy felt like it was more than high time to give our show its due. So I'm very grateful for that. They reached out and we collaborated with them a little bit on what they could say about the fates of our characters. The one thing that didn't make it in was I think we pitched maybe it could be a master Murph.
Oh,
He becomes ambassador to the Melanoid slime world.
oh, that would be cool.
It's my headcanon now. That's what happened.
Yeah, me too.
Yes.
He just like kept growing because he kind of like a Pokemon. He just kept evolving and kept getting greater and greater.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
in my head, that's exactly what happens. So
Eventually
in
he
that,
becomes president of the Federation.
there you go. Yeah. So I know you worked on this show with a very light heart and so much love for Trek. Are there any references that you put in there that we don't know about? Like I know Dahl was a amalgamation of different species. Is there some species that you're like hee and you haven't told anybody about yet?
I would say there are, but Star Trek fans, man, they comb every frame.
Yeah, they do.
They found everything, which even the really obscure stuff, like the most obscure one I think I did was in season 2. At one point they are, if you remember in season 2, when they meet, spoiler alert, if anybody who hasn't seen season 2, I guess.
What are you doing if you haven't?
What are you doing? But in season 2, they eventually meet Wesley Crusher, who is at this point a traveler.
That was so cool.
Yeah, and has brought all of them there to scan their quantum signatures to try to determine what the next step is in the sequence of events that could save the prime timeline. And while he's scanning it, Jankum at one point says, like, I'm afraid they're gonna. Are you sure this thing's not gonna scramble my genes like a Jabalian omelet? And so this was like a really obscure reference to Jabalian eggs, which are mentioned in an episode of Voyager, and in the context of which they are mentioned is Neelix is trying to create an omelet of some sort, but using Jabalian eggs, and he couldn't get it right, and he kept using 6 different seasonings and different combinations, and then eventually realized he was missing a 7th ingredient. And if you recall, in this plot of Star Trek Prodigy season 2, in that scene, eventually Wesley Crusher, as he's scanning these 6 cadets trying to figure out why the quantum signatures aren't lining up, he realizes he's missing a 7th quantum signature.
Wow.
Majel. So it was this very weird, like, it was mostly just for me. It was like just
I did that for me.
Gonna get this. This is just a joke for me.
Wow.
And then, of course, like, sure enough, after about a month after the show came out, someone was like, dude, did you put that in as a reference to the plot? And I was like, yes, I did. Congratulations, you figured it out.
Wow. That's awesome, Jace.
Yeah,
so,
that was the most obscure by far.
Love it. Love it. It's amazing.
Well, if it helps, I didn't know anything about it until now. So
yes.
it was pretty obscure. And I'm a nerd. They're always like, he knows everything. I don't know everything. I just pretend I do.
Proven today, actually. You did it.
So
thank you.
Yeah, the reintroduction of Wesley Crusher in the second season was a moment where I think that I was expecting anyone else but Wesley to show up. And whenever he did show up, my first thought was, who is that? Oh my God, it's Wesley.
Yeah.
And the way that you wrote him was just so fresh because, Wesley was always just kind of like, at least until his last appearance, he was always the white bread, wants to impress everybody and he wants everybody to be happy with him. But whenever you reintroduced him, it was almost like he'd become like Star Trek's version of the Doctor, just a little bit cuckoo in the head and everything.
Yeah.
And that made me think about the way that Prodigy handled these legacy characters like Janeway and Chakotay and Wesley Crusher. How did you approach writing those characters in a way that kept them fresh instead of just retreading the old ground, but still respecting where they've been?
Yeah. So our rule for that was always on Prodigy, we would never just bring someone back simply for just for it to be a cameo and like look who it is, remember them.
Mm.
We never wanted it to be that. We made this rule for ourselves that if we were going to bring a character on, not only would they affect our young characters' emotional and personal journeys, but the inverse would be true too. Their story would be continued in some meaningful way. And so, for instance, Admiral Janeway, obviously, there's a lot of unresolved questions around her relationship with Chakotay, for instance, or
Hmm.
the question of like how she settles into desk life after her first trip abroad, being this 7-year odyssey. Like, does she like being an admiral behind the desk? That was a question that always bugged me because I think it's in Nemesis. You see her as just like a desk jockey, giving
Yep.
Picard his marching orders, and I'm like, that doesn't feel like that would be very satisfying to Janeway.
Hmm.
And I feel like there always is this question or this longing of like maybe there's one last hurrah in me, and so that was sort of something we also wanted to play with. But yeah, with Wesley in particular, and Chakotay as well. Like I felt, I think Chakotay, a lot of people liked what the character could have been, but they always
Hmm.
felt like he could have, but he wasn't used to his fullest potential on Voyager for various reasons that we don't have to get into. And so we were like, if we're gonna bring him back, let's find a way to find a way to evolve his character in a way that using the components that are already there that we could tease out and see in a new light. And him being sort of a mentor and a father figure to Dal felt very appropriate, given his own sort of rambunctious past and rebellious past with a rebel Maquis. And with Wesley in particular, I think that we made a conscious choice not to just have him be the exact Wesley you knew when he was a teenager, because God help me if someone is the same person they were when they were 16. Oh
Hmm.
no.
Oh
That
no.
feels like I would never want to be the same guy that I was when I was an awkward teenager still finding himself, let alone
Yeah.
a traveler who can transcend time and space and perhaps has
Yeah.
lived eons, expanding his mind and his consciousness across the multiverse. He should not be the same person. But we were like, okay, so how can we take threads of who you can recognize where he came from, but this sort of interesting new self-actualized person might have blossomed from that, but also, he's lived a very unconventional life, shall we say, like being alone as this traveler that moving beyond dimensions and stuff. He probably would be a lot more like a doctor type character. And thankfully, when we talked to Will about it, he was like, "Oh, good news! That's exactly what my headcanon was as well."
Oh wow.
And I've written numerous fan fiction stories about it. And I was like, "Okay, great, perfect."
Will Wheaton writes fan fiction about himself? No, you know
That's
what?
so,
That fits. That fits. I want to read it.
About the character of Wesley. He had written.
yeah, no, but that's about himself. That's him.
Yeah,
For sure.
yeah.
I'm not going to say a thing. If I was on Star Trek, I'd be writing fan fiction about myself too.
Yeah,
I
same.
mean,
I'm like,
if that's not your nerd credentials right there, I don't know what is.
yeah, exactly. The ultimate badge. Um, one of the things I loved about Star Trek Prodigy are the diviner species, the diviner himself, being that of John Noble, and
Yeah,
the entire species that she came up with was very compelling and very interesting. They had their dark moments and the fluctuations of time. So, what was your philosophy of introducing that species into the Trek
well,
universe?
at least the Star Trek fans in the room knew that every series kind of has their this is our new species we're
Hmm.
introducing, kind of new civilization, and that felt like such a rite of passage for us to be able to create the Vau Nakat.
Hmm.
Um, and so day one, we were like, okay, what? Because I love the Romulans, I love the Cardassians. I always love those civilizations that are like slightly antagonistic, but they have a point of view, even if it's like not a good one. And within that civilization, obviously, not everyone wears the same hat, and there's disagreements and infighting. Klingons, they all have their own like, okay, if you have to describe them in a sentence, here's what it is. But if you wanted to get into the nuance of their culture, there's a lot more there, and levels that you can plumb. And so I remember, like, I think it was like day 2 or 3, there was this question of like, what are the fundamentals of what makes the Boundacat tick? And I remember getting a really intense conversation with Shauna Benson, of all things, where we're like, okay, so maybe they are a species that became highly advanced, became more capable, but culturally felt no obligation to explore the stars. And then we was like, oh, how interesting. Why would that be? Because they think there's no life in the universe. It's sort of almost like that kind of interesting religion meets science that you saw with like Galileo, where he was observing the universe, but he was also within a highly religious system that denied the heliocentric universe. So it's like, well, what if there was some sort of cultural reason that from cultural reasons or religious reasons they simply believe they are alone in the universe, and so there's no reason for them to explore the vast emptiness of space, but they are highly technologically advanced. Like, how interesting. I don't think I've seen that before. And
I love that.
And that sort of like ethnocentrism, in a way, was both the source of their arrogance and also their strength. And that's then we sort of, I think it was in my first credited episode 6, that we introduced the or maybe no, actually, you know what? I think it was in the pilot, but we rewrote the pilot to incorporate it. The phrase "there is no barrier we cannot overcome," and I felt like that was sort of like, if you had to encapsulate the personal drive of the Vaunacat to go on this sort of Ahab-esque kind of singular mission to throw the last of your species back through a time hole to try to save them, and enact vengeance against the people who you've perhaps wrongfully blamed for disrupting the fundamentals of your culture and splitting it in half with the revelation that they were not alone in the universe. It seems like it would be someone that would have that sort of almost religious zealotry, and so that was the origins of that species and that culture. And it was more fun just peeling back the layers, especially in season 2 when we get to visit Solum, their home world, and see that there are the brewings of similar to that Galileo scenario, where you find out that the diviner himself was actually a dreamer and an astronomer who had beliefs that were contrary to the predominant belief system of his world, and he dare not speak out until he realized that he had to, if he was going to save his people. And that, it was so much I could say about it, but those are the things I'm most proud of, I guess, in creating that civilization.
Awesome.
So, what is something about writing for animation that Trek fans may not realize that you could tell us about?
Gosh, one thing I think is probably worth noting is, like, in animation, it's easy to say you could do anything. you can't. I mean, you can, but it costs money. I'll put it that way.
Yeah,
it's a little bit easier sometimes to go big when every shot is not an effects shot, like with live action. So you can tell stories that are perhaps slightly more ambitious, but you still do have to be very targeted and specific. One thing about animation we did try to take advantage of is you saw glimmers sometimes where, like, the prop masters and the special effects people in Star Trek would do their very best to kind of push the limits of outside of the humanoid form. You saw that with Species 8472 and that sort of thing. But the issue, I think, was they just didn't have the budget to really go beyond the rubber wrinkles on a forehead formula most of the time. And in animation, we don't have that issue. Once you build the rig, you have it, and you can use it however you like. So we tried to push the size and the shape and the format of what aliens you could visit, and that's how you saw, like, the Simari in season 1, and obviously Rok-Tahk's physique is such that until we had built the rig, it would have been difficult to do in live action. But now that we built the rig, they were able to use it in Starfleet Academy.
Oh man. Um, was there any moment that you got to work closely with the animators and the directors and actors to make sure we got the visual beats kind of pulled together? And did you get to hang out with John Noble and or Janeway, Kate Mulgrew, or was that like they're in a studio somewhere on the other side of the planet?
Yeah, well, if I've met all of the cast,
Oh, cool.
but the tricky thing about our show in particular is that our cast were scattered literally across the globe. Like half of them were in the UK, and
Oh.
some of them were in New York. But when you're recording, you get onto like a Zoom call a lot like this one, and you're kind of
Mhm.
working with them in that way. But I did get a chance to meet all of them and hang out with them. In person at like some of the premieres and at Comic-Con and that sort of thing. I've had dinner with Kate and Brett a couple of times.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So everybody who works on the show loves it dearly. I got a chance to I met Jason Mantzoukas for the first time on the strike lines of all things.
Oh, wow.
during the writer's strike of 2023.
Yeah.
But he always loves the show and speaks very highly of it wherever he can. So and I met Ella Purnell at one of the premieres. Like it would be great to get everybody in a room, but the cost of international flights every time you need to do a pickup of somebody just doing an effort of like going it's not really worth it.
All right, that cost us $60,000.
Yeah.
Great though.
Yeah.
So, I have a question because I just realized you wrote one of my favorite episodes of the first season, and that is Kobayashi.
Sure.
Oh,
I would
beautiful.
like to know about, well, basically how this episode came about. Because this is, for anybody who doesn't know, this is the episode where Dahl takes the Kobayashi Maru test on the bridge of the Enterprise D with just a who's who of the greatest Star Trek characters, many of the actors who are not with us anymore, like Rene Auberjonois, James Doohan, and through archival recordings, they get to have this new adventure. How did this idea come together in your head?
Well, it was a group effort. I think anytime you're breaking a story, there's always the whole writer's room contributes, but it just so happens that this one fell in my lap to actually execute it. And so the initial idea was we wanted to find a way to kill two birds with one stone. One was, just as I had intimated before, we wanted to introduce some classic Star Trek concepts to Star Trek. Our show happened to be one of the first one out of the gate after Paramount Pictures and Paramount TV and CBS had merged again.
Yeah.
So this is just an interesting factoid. So the Kobayashi Maru, until that point, had only been seen in in the movies because
Right.
it was an invention of the films. It first appeared in Wrath of Khan or what have you. And so it was actually like property of Paramount Pictures, and we could not reference it
Oh,
until the
wow.
merger. And the merger happened. Like we got like the week I started breaking that story, that we got called into the lawyers to say, okay, they're merging. These are the things you can say. These are the things you can't say. Like just be careful. And I kind of like looked at the other writers and I was like, does that mean we can like do this? Sure enough, thankfully it was fine. But I just want to be on the record. Our show is the first written Star Trek show to reference the Kobayashi Maru. I think in the order of when they came out, I think some other shows snuck in references or something because ours took a long time to make. But I wrote the first TV reference of Kobayashi Maru.
You did it first. Right. Let's take your crown.
But we wanted to introduce the Kobayashi Maru, but we also wanted this to be like a breaking point and an important turning point for Dal's character, who at this point was the most sort of independent and sort of selfish in a way, or at least impulsive member of the crew and self-appointed captain. And we wanted the Kobayashi Maru to in some ways work as intended, which was to sort of teach humility to a captain and see how they react to a no-win situation, failure. And so it wound up being this great test where Dal goes in sort of all cocksure and thinking he can beat any stupid Starfleet test, not realizing that it was impossible to win. And slowly it breaks him down and realizes that the very people that he needs by his side, it's not about just having the best people on paper. It's the best crew that works with you. And that's when it kind of brings a new appreciation for him and his character, and a humility that wasn't there before. Then once we decided that, initially we were like, wouldn't it be fun if he created like the best holographic crew, and then maybe we could just bring back some Star Trek actors to revoice holographic versions of their characters. But then when we got into the nitty gritty of like who were the best in each like bridge crew role, it was like impossible to choose. We spent 8 hours debating, and by the time we had talked about it, the list was literally every Star Trek ever.
Data
There was no consensus. So I just had to like kind of pick based on most of which were just my favorites, and some of which were just like what's possible with the audio that we have. Initially, we were like, maybe we'll just have Leonard Nimoy's Spock use like legacy audio with the permission of his estate, because who embodies Star Trek more than Leonard Nimoy as Spock, right?
Right.
And this was before Strange New Worlds, mind you, and I think there was very little notion that Nimoy's Spock would make an appearance again after his appearances in the Kelvinverse movies. So we started with that idea, and then as time went on, I was like, gosh, wouldn't it be great if like the security officer, like Worf is great, but I always loved Odo, and it'd be nice to get some Deep Space Nine references in there. Yeah. Even though he wasn't a member of Starfleet, you can easily just have the program just like how when you give an imprecise command to a holodeck program,
right?
Give me a Moriarty who can defeat Data, right?
Yeah.
He said, just give me some of the best you got. And of course, during the Dominion War, there were numerous occasions where Odo was like at the consoles on the Defiant, and so he was in the system and he got pulled in. But then that meant the question of like, do we find sound alikes? I think at that point, Renee was actually still alive, and so we were going to bring him in. But then I think just as we were reaching out to his team, he sadly passed away. So then we were sort of faced with this question of like, do we pull him out of this just because of that? Or is like, well, if we're doing it with Leonard, what if we tried to do it with Renee? And so on and so forth. And then there was a question, well, what if we got Scotty in there? And so then I found myself having to find like existing audio of at least 3 different people and also we wanted to bring Uhura in, but unfortunately she was also very sick at that time, and so we were like, all right, how can we represent these people? And it came down to me having to comb through I watched something like 40 or 50 episodes top to bottom and read 80 Star Trek scripts to try to find all of the audio that I could piece together. And then I had to go to the Star Trek archives and get the clean original reel-to-reel takes, without all of the sound effects and stuff. Pull those out, get the digital files of those, sit with the editor to put them together in such a way that makes sense. Sometimes we would try that and it wouldn't work. Like there'd be, because especially like the audio from the 1960s, it was just like one little boom pole that was like on reel-to-reel tape. And they were not expecting these people. They were not expecting what they were recording to be like. They thought it was going to be just forgotten in 3 years, right? So
little did they know, 60 years later.
Yeah. So sometimes the audio just wasn't good enough to salvage, but we managed to make it work and well enough that I think fans were able to go along with it, and
it was fantastic. Your efforts paid off.
It was quite an endeavor, and my wife can attest. I was like losing my mind because this is also my first episode of Star Trek I've ever solo written.
Yeah,
that's a heck of a start.
Like, it has to be good. It's either going to be a disaster. It's going to be good. So I put in like months of work after it was done to try to get it to where it was good.
Well, it was more than good, and I can also say that Dahl high-fiving Spock at the end whenever he was giving the salute was legitimately probably the thing I've laughed at most watching a Star Trek episode, because I think I was giggling about that for about half an hour easily.
Yeah,
it was so...
I mean, if you think about it, though, someone does this to you,
Yeah.
and you've never seen it in your life, why wouldn't you think it's?
Yeah, exactly.
Just Spock's reaction, just that little thing. I was like, oh my gosh, they got Leonard Nimoy's just perfect there, right there.
Yeah. So currently you're working on a new project called Wings of Fire. That's
right.
your current baby. You tell us a little bit about that. I know it's going to be on Amazon. I'm sure it's going to be amazing based off all of your Prodigy experience. What can we fans be excited for in your next project? Because I know people want to know what you're going to do next.
Yeah, well, as I've already kind of suggested, I'm a huge fan of all things science fiction and fantasy and genre. And this is a really cool epic fantasy series based on a really popular YA fantasy series called Wings of Fire. It's epic fantasy. The easiest way I could describe the books is it's like Lord of the Rings if the dragons won.
Ooh.
So it's almost like this, centuries after the human civilization's been destroyed and the mystical creatures basically took over. Smaug and his ilk became became the new rulers of the land. And as you know, dragons are avaricious and distrustful and dangerous creatures, and so their own civilization might start going to war with itself, and that's exactly what happens in the series.
Ooh.
And then it's up to these young dragons to try to uncover a way to end the bloodshed and save the kingdoms of Pyria. It's a really cool series. There's not a lot I can say about the show yet, but stay tuned. Follow me on social media and such, and keep an eye out. And if you have anybody in your life that was a teenager in the last 12 years, ask them if they've heard of or read Wings of Fire, and the answer will almost certainly be yes.
Oh,
it's like
that's a great idea.
their Harry Potter, basically.
Oh, that's exciting, man.
I can confirm I teach fifth graders, and I have some Wings of Fire books in my classroom, and they're always saying, do you have the next one? Where's the next one? Give me the next one.
Yeah.
Nice.
There's 3 arcs, and I wrote the pilot with Tui Sutherland, the book author. She's now a wonderful collaborator and friend of mine, and I can't wait for people to see what we're cooking up.
Me too. I know it's going to be awesome.
So, which Star Trek captain do you think that Dahl would annoy the most?
Would annoy the most?
Yeah.
I mean, he would annoy them all, but I want to know who would come closest to the Homer, choking Bart reaction.
Let's walk through this, right? So we obviously, I think you have a little bit of how Kirk might react in episodes like Obsession, where he has that sort of cocksure ensign or whatnot who excuse me, who he has to basically dress down and say stop being so impulsive. You're going to get your crew killed and yourself killed. But I think in the end he took kind of an avuncular sort of advisory role in that. So probably not Kirk. I think Kirk would maybe tolerate it to a degree, but then just talk to him about it and have a hard time. Picard, I think you could make a very good case that Picard would be the most annoying.
Yeah, shut up, Wesley.
He's repeatedly said, "I'm not good with children. I don't like children." And obviously his contempt for early Wesley is famous. But I think eventually it depends on which season Picard you're referring to. I would say season 1 Picard absolutely would annoy the hell out of him, but maybe by season 7, I think he would have a much different tack. I think Cisco, he had his own sort of rebellious teenagers to deal with, but he always was quite supportive, I think, and obviously was stern when he had to be, but he was also quite loving. So I think maybe he would see a little bit of who Dal was trying to be and take him aside. I think Janeway obviously has a soft spot for kids. There's a number of times where she took young, like Naomi Wildman aside and
Mhm.
mentored her and whatnot. I think Archer also is. I feel like he would be like the cool uncle.
Yeah.
um, you know, yeah, I think it's got to be season 1 Picard.
There it is. There it is. All right. Thank you so much for joining us in the Captain's Quadrant. We want to make sure you make it to your next stop along the way in the roads of life.
Yes.
We're going to put the link below of the new show that you gave us so people can get a little bit more in depth and information about it. And we'll put your social medias below so that we can all say hello and keep in touch and see what you're doing. Because I'm excited about what you're going to be doing next, because you brought such a majesty and a magnanimous, amazing show in Star Trek Prodigy. And I'm just hoping that the next post you're going to post is season 3 or the movie. So I know you can't say anything, but that's what I'm expecting in the future.
Well, follow me on all social medias at Good Aaron. Oops, that's my alarm going off. At Good Aaron. That's GOODAARON. You can find me on pretty much every social media, and if there's anything I can share, I will share it there.
Perfect. Thank you so much, and live long and prosper.
Peace and long life.